My name is Mariam, born and raised in Dearborn, Michigan, and this is the story of my journey leaving Dearborn, navigating my identity, and then finding my way back. I was no longer seen as Mariam. I was Mariam my whole life, and then I left and I became just, that Muslim girl. I think I just had a really hard time accepting that when I walk into the room, the first thing people are seeing is my headscarf. It was, I walk into a room and I had to just accept that that was the first thing people were seeing and judging me on. And so that was really difficult to navigate when I first left Dearborn. It made me, I think, work that much harder and read that much more and become that much more knowledgeable so that I could contribute in a way where I finally felt like I was just as worthy and capable of being at Harvard as anyone else was. My first year at Harvard, I decided to write for the Harvard Crimson, which is a newspaper there. And really, when I looked around the room of, the opinion editorial board, there was no one who looked like me. There was no one to represent my community or really any minority. I was probably one of 3 minorities in the entire room. And I remember at the time there was this, movement to free Muslim women of their hijab. And so people were protesting in the streets, essentially naked. And I remember looking back of like, that is the exact opposite definition of liberation to me personally. And so I wrote an article in the Crimson essentially, explaining that this isn't liberation. Like, you don't need to speak up for me in a way that doesn't represent me. Like, let me tell you my story and my identity and what liberates me. And they published the article my freshman year, and writing for the Harvard Crimson just allowed me to tell my story and not have someone else tell it for me. When I left Dearborn, I went through a lot of the process of navigating my identity and making a voice for myself and making space at the table for me and my community and my identity. And it was actually really interesting, upon my homecoming, upon returning to Dearborn, I then just had to navigate being back and what that meant. And I think for some time I almost felt like my dreams were dying, and I say that in the sense of, I came back and it's so easy to be around your family and the community and the food and everything that I think I just started thinking complacent thoughts of like, yeah, it would be nice to just like, stay and have a comfortable life here. And it was upon my return in the last 3 years of being back that I really learned how important it is for our community and people who belong to it to have not only just room at the table, but be influencing the policies that go on in our world and really to be in the halls of power. And so as I'm graduating and thinking of my career trajectory, I see myself in DC, really in the halls of power where I can advocate for not only our community, but really all communities of color. And so being back in Dearborn wasn't the dream killer that I thought it would be. It actually was what inspired those dreams to be in the halls of power and be advocating for communities like my own. When I think back to my young self, my 17-year-old self who was applying to Harvard, I just remember how scary that notion was and how intimidated I was. And even again, my first year there, how scary it was to be in those lecture halls and to be walking through the yard and feeling whether I deserved to be there. And if I could go back to that young self, that young Mariam, I would just tell her that you are just as capable and intelligent and deserving of being there as anyone else. My advice to any young person who's thinking of leaving the community or who thinks they have a dream that's too far-fetched is don't ever reject yourself. Really believe that you have the path and you have the voice and the community support to get to where you want to be. I think what I'm most excited about going forward is the fact that I have no idea what the path looks like right now. And that's really exciting in some way, that I can't tell you exactly what my life is going to look like in 5 years. But I know I'll be doing work that means so much to me, that's impactful, and that's changing the world. I don't know exactly what it looks like, but I know it exists.